welcome back to my channel. Tonight, we set sail into forgotten waters, where the salt air clung to secrets, and the wind whispered names and never made it into the history books. What truly happened to the pirate women of the seas? What happened after they were captured, judged, and erased? We will follow their stories gently, not in a rush, not with drama, but with quiet footsteps across deck planks, soft moonlight across tattered sails, and dreams shaped like waves. So, tuck in beneath your blankets, close your eyes if you wish, and let the sea carry your thoughts softly into the past. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to this channel so you never miss these slow, sleepy journeys through history's forgotten corners. Now then, let us drift away together. Our story tonight begins with the tide. The year is 1720. The Caribbean breeze is warm, but not hot, soft like silk, gently brushing over the wooden deck of a small schooner called the Moon Whisper. It is not a ship of war, not a navy vessel, and not a merchant vessel exactly. Tonight, it carries no cargo, only memories. And one woman. Her name was not recorded. Not truly. Some documents list her as Grace, others as Annie. Still others claim she never had a name, only a curse. But for now, let us call her Eliza. She stands quietly near the ship's rail, watching the moonlight ripple across the black water. Chains rest lightly at her wrists. Not tight, not cruel, but present. She has been captured aboard this ship, being carried back to Port Royal, back to judgment. But tonight, for these few hours, there is peace, even for her. The crew sleeps. They do not fear her. She is only one woman, after all. Only one woman. But the ocean knows better, because Eliza once commanded 20 men, led to raids without a single drop of blood spilled, and carved her way through the British merchant routes with a smile and a silent ship. But no court would hear that. They would ask where her husband was, why she wore trousers, why she never screamed.
Imagine Ann Barney under a false name settling in North Carolina, raising a daughter who never knew the word pirate. Imagine Mary Read, quiet and pale, but alive, teaching young girls how to read maps upside down and fight with a dagger tucked in their boot. Imagine the women who never made it to trial, who vanished before the ink was dry, who burned their ships before their names could be recorded. Eliza turns from the rail. A small lantern flickers above her. She is not afraid. Tomorrow may bring iron bars and courtroom glares, but tonight the sea still remembers her. The wind rustles through her hair. She speaks only once to no one in particular. I was captain for 7 months, and the ocean never once called me girl. Down below a letter lies folded in a satchel, addressed to no one, or perhaps to you it reads, "If this reaches you, know that I do not regret the salt or the silence, only that history will forget how quiet I was when I was free." And so we end tonight's first tide, not in tragedy, but in wonder. How many voices have slipped through history's cracks? How many stories rest beneath the waves, whispering gently just beyond what the record keepers noticed. Let us listen for them. Together, one by one.
The candlelight was dim in the makeshift courtroom at Spanish Town, Jamaica. The walls were close, the air heavy with sweat and humidity. The benches were hard, uneven, carved by prisoners or soldiers or time. And sitting near the front, hands folded in her lap, was a woman dressed in a faded linen shirt and trousers stained with sea salt. That her name was an odd Bonnie. She did not look afraid, not because she was fearless, but because she had already seen death once or twice, and it had failed to impress her. The court official leaned forward. He was older, puffy around the eyes. His powdered wig sat crooked on his sunburnt head. He looked at Anne as though squinting into sunlight. "You are accused of piracy, of sailing under a false flag, of attacking the king's ships, and of dressing in man's clothing." Anne said nothing. Her hands rested calmly on her knees. A long silence stretched across the room, like a sail unfurling in windless air. Then she said softly, but clearly, "I dressed for the work I did. Would you have me load a cannon in skirts?" Laughter scattered across the room. One of the guards chuckled before being elbowed into silence. The judge did not smile. "Do you deny being a pirate?" Anne tilted her head just slightly. "Do you deny being a coward, hiding behind robes and wigs while other men do the bleeding?" Another silence, not shock. Respect, from some disdain from others. But no one interrupted her again. Outside the courtroom, the day was hot and thick, with the scent of crushed sugarcane inside. The trial dragged on. Witnesses were called, sailors from merchant ships she had raided. They described her as vicious, as fearless, as too clever to be a woman. One described her swordplay as better than any man's on deck. Another described the way she laughed when their ship surrendered without a fight. None of them seemed sure whether they hated her or admired her. And all of them had survived because, and never killed for sport. She took what she needed, nothing more. Then came the sentencing. She and Mary Reed stood side by side. Mary, pale and sickly, her breathing shallow, her eyes dim, but sharp. The judge looked at them both. He was not used to sentencing women, especially not women who stared directly back at him. He cleared his throat. "The court finds you guilty of piracy. The punishment is death, by hanging." Number gasps. No shouts. Just stillness. Anne's expression did not change. Then the twist came. Mary stepped forward. Her voice was rough, her face unreadable. "I am pregnant." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The law in British colonies did not allow the execution of a pregnant woman. Not until the child was born. Anne waited. Then, slowly, she added, "As am I." The courtroom trembled with uncertainty. Whether it was true or not did not matter at that moment. What mattered was delay. What mattered was life. A little longer, just enough time to disappear. The court had no choice. They were sent back to prison, their executions postponed until after the birth. History becomes murky after this. Some records say Mary died in her cell of a fever. Others say she vanished or was smuggled out under night's cover. Anne, too, disappears from official documents. There are no burial records, no gravestone, no final mention in the court books. Just silence. But legends remain. One tale says that Anne was released by her father, a wealthy plantation owner who still had political strings to pull, that she remarried, lived quietly in the colonies, died at the age of 8 for another says she took a new name and returned to sea, never again as captain but as navigator, a ghost on the tides. Tonight, in your mind, you may choose the ending is in sipping tea in a garden in Virginia, watching her grandchildren climb trees, or is she still aboard a ship somewhere, who'd drawn low eyes on the horizon, map in hand, compass spinning? Or perhaps she is somewhere in between, a breath of salt, a hush in the wind, a story waiting to be told by anyone patient enough to fall asleep listening. On the wall of that courtroom, long ago, someone carved a name in the wood. Not a man's name, not a date, just a single spiral dot almost invisible, but still there. Waiting asterisk. The sea is not always blue dot here. Off the coast of Guangdong, it is green, gray, and sometimes even gold, especially at sunrise. The sails of the red flag fleet move like whispers across that glowing water. More than 300 ships, more than 20,000 pirates, all under the command of one woman. She stands quietly at the bow of the largest junk ship in the fleet. Her hands are folded, her face calm. Her name is Qing Shi. No thunder announces her arrival, no battle drum, only the soft creak of wood and the distant call of gulls. Her reputation is enough. Once a worker in a floating brothel, then a pirate's wife, and then, when he died, she did not weep. She took command, not through violence, not through blood, but through order, through quiet law. Her rules were legendary, strict but fair. No pirate under her command could steal from villagers. Those who did were executed. Women taken captive were to be treated with dignity. Those who broke that rule disappeared. Ships sailed in formation. Loot was shared equally. Cowards were punished, but mercy was allowed when earned. The fleet grew, more than the emperor could tolerate, and yet, when warships came to hunt her down, she defeated them, again and again, until the sea itself seemed to bow. But even pirate queens cannot rule forever, and Qing Shi did not wait to be captured. She watched the politics shift. She read between the tides. She knew when to disappear. And so, in 1810, she did something no pirate had done before. She surrendered, but not in shame, not in chains. She walked into the Governor General's office with full sails, flanked by hundreds of her pirates, wearing red silk and calm confidence. And she made her demand. We will give up the fleet. In exchange, we want full pardons, freedom, and a future. They agreed, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. Qing. She walked away from piracy, with everything intact, her wealth, her name, her life. She opened a gambling house, raised children, died quietly in her sleep at 6'9". No chains, no gallows, no forgotten grave. And yet, many history books omit her name. She was not romantic like Jack Sparrow, not tragic like Blackbeard. She was successful, organized, untouchable, and that is rarely remembered. But tonight, we remember. We imagine her final voyage, not with cannon fire, but with moonlight on silk sails. We see her walking across a quiet deck, smiling as the sea hushes beneath her feet. Perhaps you can picture it. Now, a lantern swaying above the harbor, its light catching her silhouette as she steps onto dry land, not to run, but to rest. And somewhere, a ledger closes, a sword is hung, and the waves finally stop calling. Not every pirate story ends in capture. Some end in choice, in timing, in silent brilliance. And those stories, like the sea, go on whispering long after the sails are furled. Sleep well, traveler. And if you dream of the sea tonight, listen closely. There may be a woman walking its surface without leaving a trace. Asterisk, imagine a quiet harbor in Massachusetts. The year is 1770. The wind is sharp with the scent of cedar and salt, and the sails above your head flutter like parchment in soft hands. The town is small, just a few clapboard houses, a church steeple, and a slow creak of fishing boats rocking in the morning tide. From the attic window of a modest home near the docks, a young woman gazes out. Her name is Fanny Campbell, and her story is not carved into the stones of history, but it should be. Fanny had always loved the sea, even as a child. She would sneak out late to sit on the shore and listen to the waves breathing in the dark. She read every sailor's tale she could find, knew knots by heart, mapped the stars in a journal she kept hidden beneath floorboards. But life had a different script for her, one that involved embroidery, quiet smiles, and waiting by windows, until one day, the sea knocked harder. The man she loved, a kind, brave sailor named William, was captured by pirates on his way back from the Caribbean. Word reached Fanny weeks later, delivered in hushed tones by a captain with sunburnt hands. William had been taken, perhaps sold, perhaps killed. Most would have mourned. Some would have prayed. Fanny. She chose something else. She cut her hair, bound her chest, and stole her brother's clothes. She became a sailor. Fanny boarded a merchant ship under the name Frank Thompson, working as a cabin boy at first, then climbing quickly because she was clever and calm under pressure, and knew how to read the sea like it was a diary. Only she had the key to. No one suspected. Her voice was quiet, her steps sure. She avoided fights, but won every bet in arm wrestling. And then, one night, her ship was attacked. Pirates. Rough men, greedy, desperate. But Fanny didn't cower. She rallied the crew, took the wheel when the captain fell, fought like wind made flesh. When the smoke cleared, they had won, and the pirates captured. Among them was William. Alive. Tired, dirty, but very much himself. He stared at Frank in disbelief as she reached up and removed her cap, let her hair fall loose in the salty wind, and said softly, "I told you I would find you." The tale doesn't end in tragedy. Not this one. Fanny and William returned to Massachusetts and married beneath the same tree where they'd first kissed. Some say she went on to write her adventures under a different name. Others claim the entire story's a legend, a tale told to inspire girls by candlelight. But truth has its own rhythm, and sometimes the heart's compass is stronger than any storm. Tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine a woman at the helm of a ship, sleeves rolled up, eyes on the horizon. Not for riches, not for fame, but for love. And let that love guide you gently to sleep. ChatGPT said. Of course, let us now sail closer to the rugged New England coastline, where wind-bitten cliffs and crashing waves once whispered the name of a woman who smiled too sweetly and robbed too quietly. Boring history for sleep. What happened to female pirates after capture and more. Part 5. Rachel Wall, the first American woman pirate. Approximately 2,000 to 2,500 words. ASMR-style bedtime storytelling. The year is 1781. A cold wind drifts along the New Hampshire shoreline, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed, and the low groan of wooden masts rocking in their mooring. In the harbor town of Boston, beneath the gray mist of dawn, a figure in a bonnet walks slowly across the cobbled streets. To those who passed her, she looked no different from any other fisherman's wife. Polite, mild, maybe a bit too quiet. But Rachel Wall was not what she seemed. She was born into poverty, married young, and always felt the sea calling her from beyond the harbor's edge. Her husband, George Wall, was reckless and wild, the kind of man who gambled more than he earned, drank more than he listened, and smiled to Italy at storms. But Rachel watched, she listened, and when George's sailing friends proposed something dangerous, something unlawful, she agreed. They formed a crew, small at first, 3 men, Rachel, and a stolen sloop. But Rachel had a gift that made their piracy different. She used kindness. They would sail close to shore, pretending their ship had wrecked. Rachel, dressed in tattered clothes, would cry out for help as if she were a castaway. She would wave frantically from the deck, call out 2 passing ships, her voice laced with panic. And when another boat came to help, George and the others would strike. Blades drawn, voices raised. No warning. The rescuers would be robbed, sometimes left adrift, sometimes worse. Over time, they struck again and again, always close to shore, always under fog or moonlight. Rachel kept logs. She knew who they'd hit, what they'd taken, how long they had, until the Navy caught scent. But the sea, as it always does, turned on them. One stormy night, their sloop was torn apart near Cape Ann. George drowned. The rest scattered. Rachel, alone, returned to Boston. For a time, she tried to live honestly, working as a servant, then as a washerwoman, smiling to the city folk who had no idea of the sea-born fire burning behind her eyes. But hunger returned, and temptation, and one night, she tried to steal a woman's bonnet from the dockside while the tide was high. She was caught, in jail. Rachel confessed to everything. but not in shame. She stood calmly as the court listed her crimes. 6 confirmed attacks at sea, several robberies on land. She did not deny it. In her final statement, she said, "I implore the pity of the Almighty, yet I do not expect mercy from men." She was hanged on October 8, 1789, at just 29 years old, the first known female pirate in American history. No statue was raised, no grave marked, only silence and the goals. But tonight, you remember her, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a whisper on the tide, a voice that sang too quietly for the record keepers. A woman who used kindness as a trap, a smile as a sword, and the waves as her accomplice. So now, as your breath slows and the soft hush of sleep begins to wash over you, picture her bonnet fluttering in the wind, eyes scanning the waves, forever caught between shipwreck and shadow. The waves near Brittany are not gentle. They crash hard against the rocky shores, white foam curling like claws over the dark stones. The wind carries the scent of salt, but also iron, and somewhere, just past the horizon, the distant toll of bells. The year is 1343, and a woman stands in the shadows of her stone-walled home, her hands trembling, her face a mask of quiet fury. Her name is Jean de, and her story begins with betrayal. Jean was a noblewoman, wealthy, respected, mother of 5 children, married to Olivier de Clisson, a man known for his loyalty to the French king. But loyalty can be a dangerous thing. One spring morning, Olivier was accused of treason. The charges were thin, political, designed to silence a powerful voice, and yet he was executed, his head displayed on a pike in Nantes as a warning to all who dared question the crown. Jean did not weep. She burned. Within weeks, she sold her estates, gathered her children, and disappeared from polite society. The next time her name surfaced, it was spoken in fear. Jean had taken to the sea, not to escape, but to fight, to avenge her husband, to make the French king pay. And so began the tale of the Lioness of Brittany. She commanded 3 ships, all painted black, with red sails that billowed like blood in the wind. Her crew was loyal, fierce, and bound to her by a simple promise: we take from the crown, and we leave nothing. For years, she hunted French vessels, merchant ships, supply lines, anything that bore the king's crest. Her attacks were swift, precise, and ruthless. Some say she spared no one. Others whispered that she let the innocent live, sending them back with a message: the lioness will not be tamed. But as the years wore on, even vengeance grew weary. Her children needed safety. Her crew began to scatter, and so, in a final act of defiance, Jean retired. She remarried, lived quietly in England, raised her children far from the shadow of politics, and when she died, her ships vanished into legend. The truth of Jean's story has blurred over time. Some call her a hero, others a monster. Still others say she never existed, that she was a ghost invented by sailors to explain the wreckage they could not understand. But tonight, she exists in your mind, in the soft pull of memory, in the quiet strength that rises when you think of loss and what comes after. Picture her now, a black ship on a gray horizon, its sails whispering in the wind. No crown, no throne, only the open sea. And a promise kept. Asterisk: there is a place along the Irish coast where the water shimmers not just with salt, but with memory. The cliffs are steep here, jagged and ancient, covered in green that never fades. They rise like forgotten temples above the Atlantic, watching as waves crash in rhythm, a slow, deep breathing of the earth. If you walk these cliffs at dusk, the fog creeps in from the sea like an old ghost trying to remember its name, and somewhere, tucked between the rocks and the sea wind, you may still hear it, whispered Grain Mayole, or, as the English later called her, Grace O'Malley. She was born in 1530, in the kingdom of Amhail, a land ruled by ancient Irish clans. Long before the English crown stretched its fingers this far west. Her father was on Dubdara Y Mail, a respected chieftain and sea trader who taught her the ways of the sea before she could even pronounce the names of the stars. Grace was not expected to inherit ships, not expected to lead. She was a girl, a daughter, born to marry and stay ashore, but the sea had other plans. The story goes that when she was young, she begged to go with her father on a trading voyage to Spain. He refused, saying the sea was no place for a girl with long hair that might catch in the rigging. So Grace, in a moment of sharp childhood clarity, cut off all her hair with a hunting knife, walked straight into her father's chamber, hair in hand, and said, "Now I'm no different from your crew. Will you still say no?" He said yes. And from that day forward, the sea knew her name. Grace learned to command ships as easily as most girls learn to sew. She studied tides, read clouds like chapters, and practiced sailing in silence so the ocean would never surprise her. By the time she was a teenager, she could steer a galley through fog without compass or lantern. She married, young, to Donello, a fierce chieftain from the neighboring clan. Together they had 3 children, but Donald was hot-headed and reckless. He fought too often, trusted too little, and listened too rarely. When he was eventually killed in a skirmish over a castle, Grace did not retreat into widowhood. She took the castle and the ships and the loyalty of her people. She moved her base to Clare Island, where sea caves formed natural harbors and the cliffs made it nearly impossible to attack from land. There she built her fleet. It started with a handful of galleys, low-slung boats perfect for quick raids and fast retreats. But soon, Grace commanded dozens of vessels. She collected tolls from any ship that passed her waters. Whether English, Spanish, or Irish, those who paid, passed. Those who did not, often found themselves lighter by a few crates of cargo. Her power grew, not just because she was skilled, but because she understood something rare for her time. Respect is not always given. Sometimes it is taken softly, quietly, by showing up, again and again, even when you are told not to. Grace made alliances with other clans, traded with Spain, and even launched her own raids against coastal fortresses when she felt they threatened her territory. But still, as her legend grew, so did the unease in London. Because the English crown could not understand her. She was not just a pirate, not a queen, not a soldier, not a noblewoman in the traditional sense. She was something else entirely, and that made her dangerous. By the 1570s, Queen Elizabeth I had begun to tighten her grip on Ireland. New governors, new taxes, new laws that stripped native chieftains of their power. Grace refused to bow. She resisted in small ways, harboring rebels, refusing to collect taxes on behalf of the crown, protecting the old Irish ways in the face of modern occupation. And then, in 1593, the crown arrested her son, her half-brother, and several members of her crew. It was a message, but Grace answered. At the age of 63, with silver streaking through her black hair, she sailed to England, not under cover of fog, not with her fleet behind her. Alone, she requested a meeting with Queen Elizabeth herself, and after weeks of waiting, in strange rooms, with strangers who spoke too quickly, the meeting was granted. The 2 women met at Greenwich Palace. 2 queens, 2 rulers of completely different worlds. Elizabeth wore gowns of silk, pearls around her neck, and spoke in perfect, polished English. Grace wore simple Irish garments, her hair tied back, a dagger hidden in her sash. They spoke for over an hour. No translator, no script. What they said remains only partially recorded, but what followed was clear. Grace negotiated the release of her family. She was granted a royal pension and allowed to maintain her fleet as long as she refrained from attacking English ships. She had done the impossible, not through force, but by showing up, in person, with dignity, and refusing to let herself be defined by the men who feared her. Grace returned to Ireland and lived many more years along the coast she loved. Some say she died at sea. Others say she passed peacefully in her stone home on Clare Island. No grave has been confirmed. No monument marks her final rest. Only cliffs, waves, and the sharp, steady wind. And tonight, as you rest, you may find yourself walking beside her on A quiet shore dot with sea spray on your face and the sound of gulls overhead. You may hear the creak of wood, feel the roll of the tide, and sense the spirit of a woman who never once asked for permission. Only a fair wind and room to sail. The candle burns low in the corner of an old tavern. Its wax pools lazily, dripping like forgotten years onto the warped wood below. The air smells of sea salt, pipe smoke, and spilled rum. But beneath that, something softer, a story long buried in salt and silence. The old sailor leans in across the table, his fingers worn and trembling. They say her name was Charlotte de Berry. He begins, his voice no louder than the breeze through canvas sails. And they say she sailed with vengeance in her heart and blood on her hands. The earliest whispers of Charlotte de Berry come from the 17th century, though her story did not appear in writing until the 1800s. And even then, it was tangled in fiction. She may have lived. She may have been invented by a pulp novelist to sell stories of exotic seas and daring women. But the tale, once told, refused to die. And so we tell it tonight, softly, slowly, as all half-true things deserve. Charlotte, we are told, was born in England in a coastal town where ship bells rang like lullabies and every child knew the scent of tidewater before they could walk. She was beautiful, with dark curls and sharp eyes that saw far beyond the village lanes. As a teenager, she fell in love with a sailor, a young man with rough hands and soft promises. Her parents disapproved. They wanted her to marry a man from town, a baker, perhaps, a cobbler. But Charlotte had no interest in dry land. She married the sailor in secret, and when his ship sailed, she disguised herself as a boy and joined the crew. At first, no one noticed. She worked harder than the others, kept quiet, did not flinch when storms rolled in or when rats scurried across the deck. But one day, the truth came out. Some say it was a jealous crewmate, others, an accident, a shirt unbuttoned in the heat of work. Either way, she was exposed. The punishment for women aboard ships was often brutal. Some captains saw it as a curse. Others saw women as distractions or trophies. But Charlotte's husband stood up for her. He tried to defend her, and for that, he was flogged. And then, thrown overboard. Charlotte changed that day. Something inside her froze. Not with fear, not with sadness, but with purpose. She waited, plotted, and one night, when the ship was becalmed, she took her blade and slit the captain's throat while he slept. The crew woke to find her at the helm, eyes wide and clear, hair blowing free, and they, for reasons unknown, did not resist. Perhaps they saw in her something greater than rage. Perhaps they were simply afraid, or perhaps they were tired of cruel men and saw in Charlotte a different kind of storm. From there, her legend grows. She became captain, commanded her own ship, raided other vessels, fought with ferocity, spared those who surrendered quickly, but showed no mercy to slavers or cruel commanders. Some say she wore red silk beneath her coat and kept her late husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. Others say she sang sea shanties in a low voice as she loaded cannons. But always, they say she looked to the horizon like she was still chasing something just beyond sight. One version of her story tells of betrayal, that she fell in love again, with a Spaniard this time, a man who promised peace and poetry, and a life far from blood and sails. But when she let down her guard, he turned on her, stabbed her crew, tried to steal her ship. She caught him, tied him to the mast, and left him for the gulls. Another version says she was captured by a French vessel, put on trial, condemned, and yet, as she stood upon the gallows, the rope snapped 3 times, and the people, spooked by what they saw as a sign, let her go. There are even darker versions. Some say she was marooned on an island after a mutiny, forced to watch her crew starve, her skin blister in the sun. They say she built a raft from driftwood and bones and vanished into a storm that never ended. No records confirm any of it. No diaries, no court papers, no ship's logs, only tales told in candlelight. And yet we still whisper her name. Why? Because some stories feel true, even when they are not. Because there are pieces of Charlotte in every woman who refuses to let the world shape her. Because the sea does not keep written history. It keeps sound, scent, and shadow. Tonight, as the fog drapes your mind, like velvet, and the hush of sleep pulls at your thoughts, imagine her Charlotte, de Berry, barefoot on a moonlit deck, blade at her side, heart stitched with memory and flame. She may have been real, she may not, but she mattered, because someone once imagined her, and imagination is sometimes just another kind of truth. Asterisk, the desert meets the sea at a sharp, golden edge. Here, the dunes fall into blue waves like long-forgotten kingdoms sinking into silence. The air tastes of salt and sun-baked stone. Cicadas hum in olive trees. And in the shadowy harbors of cities like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, the sails of corsairs rise like parchment against the cloudless sky. We are in the 16th century now, a time when the Mediterranean was a chessboard. Spanish galleons, Ottoman frigates, Christian crusaders, and Muslim corsairs, all chasing power across sapphire waters. This was the world of the Barbary pirates. And hidden in the folds of that world were women. They are harder to find in the records, often unnamed, often listed only as wife or concubine, or more intriguingly disguised sailor. But their presence is undeniable in the Mediterranean, where cultures collided like waves on rocks. Rules bent often, and women, especially enslaved ones, or daughters of powerful captains, sometimes found the seams between those rules, and sailed through them. One story comes from Algiers, where a female sailor named Acha al-Gamrik is said to have disguised herself for years aboard her father's vessel. He was a respected corsair, feared for his swift raids on Christian merchant ships. After his death, Acha took his place, not officially, but quietly. She continued his routes, kept his crew fed and paid, made deals with local governors. Some even say she worked as a spy for the Ottoman Admiral Harreddin Barbarossa himself. She wore her father's turban, carried 2 curved daggers, and never once revealed her true identity until old age slowed her hand. Another tale floats from Tunis. This time, a captive, a Spanish noblewoman, Isabel de Vera, taken during a corsair raid and brought across the sea to be sold. But she was clever. She learned Arabic, read the Quran, converted not for survival, but for strategy. She eventually married the corsair who had taken her and convinced him to let her handle negotiations. She brokered ransoms, decided which prisoners were worth keeping, which were worth freeing. Within a decade, she was known in the courts of Tunis as La Señora del Mar, Lady of the Sea. Not by her captors, by her clients. Still others served as informants, women left behind in coastal villages while their husbands sailed off for months at a time. These women ran ports, managed trade, sent coded letters. When European ships were spotted offshore, they hid weapons in baskets of dates, wrapped messages around their ankles like silk ribbons, and when needed, they fought. Small knives, bowstrings, and silence. Unlike their Caribbean sisters, the female pirates of the Barbary world lived in a space of shadows. Many were never named, but we know they existed because their absence would make no sense. Ships do not provision themselves. Fortresses do not whisper, unless someone tells them how. And if you read the logs closely, you will find irregularities. A woman's signature written in a firm, educated hand, when none was expected. A letter addressed to Sheikh Amin, long believed to be a man, until someone found her burial site near the port of Oran. The European powers painted the Barbary pirates as villains, which they were. Sometimes, they raided coastal towns, took captives, disrupted trade. But they were also part of a complex world, where empire and economy blurred, and survival meant knowing when to fight and when to vanish into the crowd. The women of this world were not loud. They did not command fleets under blood-red flags. They did not write memoirs. But they survived. They navigated silence. And that may be the hardest navigation of all. Tonight, As the hush of sleep settles over you, imagine her, a woman in robes, moving through a crowded market, eyes sharp behind her veil. She hands a sailor a basket. Inside, pomegranates, a letter, and a promise. Later, the ship leaves quietly at dusk, sails catching wind like a whispered prayer. No cannon, no battle cry. Just grace and grit. In gold, tucked beneath silence. Asterisk, the sea near Tituin does not roar. It whispers, lapping softly against stone piers and carved archways that have stood for centuries. The wind comes not in gusts but in slow, honeyed breezes that wrap themselves around the olive trees and the latticework windows of the Medina. Here, in a city where the call to prayer floats like a lullaby, one woman once ruled both land and sea. Her name meant the noble lady who is free. Saida, L-H-U-R-R-A. She was not a myth, not a sailor's tale, not a shadow stitched together by rumor. She was real. And tonight, as your breath deepens, you will hear her name, not in anger, not in war, but in calm. She was born around 1485, in the heart of Andalusia, during the final years of Muslim rule in Spain. Her early life was wrapped in displacement. As Catholic forces took back the Iberian Peninsula, Muslims were pushed out by sword, decree, or fire. Saida's family fled across the Strait of Gibraltar to Morocco, leaving behind a homeland they would never see again. Refugee, exile, child of a lost kingdom. These were the tides that shaped her soul. She was educated, not just in the Quran or poetry, but in diplomacy, in languages, geopolitics, philosophy. While others arranged her future by marriage and motherhood, Saida learned the art of alliances, the shifting winds of trade, the meaning of silence. At a negotiation table, by her early 20s, she had married the governor of Tetuan, a strong man, but one who recognized her sharp mind and let her rule beside him when he died. She did not fade into mourning. She became queen. Her rule was not ceremonial. She issued edicts, controlled trade routes, settled land disputes. But more than that, she turned her gaze seaward to the same Spanish and Portuguese forces who had pushed her family from Al-Andalus to the same European kingdoms, now building forts on African coasts. She would not forget, she would not forgive, and so she made an alliance, not with an army, but with Barbarossa, the famed Ottoman admiral, whose pirate fleets ruled the central Mediterranean. Together, they struck a silent accord. He would harass European ships in the east. She would do the same in the west. Sayyida Al-Hora became the queen of piracy along the Moroccan coast. Her corsairs were not reckless looters. They were trained, disciplined, focused. They struck with precision, targeting Portuguese supply lines, Spanish galleons heavy with colonial gold, and ships carrying goods from the Canary Islands. She captured ships, ransomed crews, sold weapons, and controlled ports. Her enemies called her a pirate. Her people called her protector. She was avenging their loss, their exile, their humiliation, not with cannon fire alone, but with strategy and memory. In time, her reputation grew. In 1541, at the age of nearly 60, she received a marriage proposal from the Sultan of Morocco himself. He was the most powerful man in the region, used to summoning brides to his palace. But Sayyida Al-Hora refused. If he wished to marry her, he would come to her city. To Tituan he agreed, and it was the only recorded instance in Moroccan history where a royal wedding took place outside the royal court. Even her name was a message. She never used her birth name again. Only Al-Hora, the free woman. No one owned her. No crown defined her. No throne shaped her decisions. But as time passed, envy bloomed. Others grew wary of her power, her alliances. Eventually, she was forced to step down. Her son-in-law replaced her. Her letters ceased and she faded from view. We do not know when she died or where she is buried. There are no statues, no plaques. Only ledgers, diplomatic papers, and ship logs that show a woman moved through history like a storm just off the coast. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine her, A woman standing on a tower balcony, her black cloak fluttering in the sea breeze, watching the lanterns of her ships flicker in the harbor below. No noise, no celebration, only quiet pride, only the memory of home she once lost, and the knowledge that she had never stopped sailing toward it. Asterisk, the Caribbean Sea is never quiet. Even in stillness, it sings. Palm fronds rustle with the breath of salt air. Waves tickle white sand shores, and somewhere in the distance, a conch shell hums softly in the hands of a fisherman at dusk. The year is 1717, and the island slush, fragrant, sun-warmed, are wrapped not in paradise, but in gold fever and gunpowder dreams. This is the golden age of piracy. British governors, Spanish colonists, Dutch merchants, and countless runaway souls crisscross the waters on sloops and brigantines, each chasing power or survival, and into this chaotic tide stepped two women. Not as passengers, not as prizes, but as pirates. Anne Bonny, Mary Read, two names that would echo like thunder long after the cannon smoke cleared an air. Bonny was born in Ireland around 1698. The story goes that she was the illegitimate child of a lawyer and his maid. When the scandal grew too large, her father packed up the family and moved them to the Carolina colonies, where land was plenty and reputations easier to polish. But Anne was not made for colonial politeness. She preferred knives to embroidery, horses to suitors, fighting to flattery. By her teens, she had gained a reputation for both beauty and fury. A boy once insulted her. She reportedly stabbed him. She married a small-time pirate named James Bonny against her father's wishes. In return, her father disowned her, but Anne did not care. She and James set sail for New Providence, a pirate haven in the Bahamas, where law was soft and rum flowed freely. It was there that she met a man named Calico Jack Rackham. Charming, flashy, ambitious, he wore bright coats, loved theater and danger in equal measure, and saw in a not just a woman, but an equal. They fell into something fierce, not a courtship, a collision, and left her husband, joined Jack's crew, and picked up a cutlass. But there was one problem. Most ships at the time did not allow women aboard. It was seen as bad luck, a distraction, a danger. And dressed as a man, fought as a man, drank and cursed as a man, and earned the crew's respect, not through deception, but sheer, relentless courage. And soon, she was not alone. Mary Read's beginnings are even more tangled. Born in England, she was dressed as a boy from a young age by her mother, a desperate widow trying to trick relatives into paying child support meant for a lost son. Mary grew up this way, worked on ships and in stables, fought in wars, disguised as a man. She joined the military, fell in love with a fellow soldier, married him when her secret was revealed. They opened an inn together, but he died, and Mary, heartbroken, returned to the sea. She joined a Dutch ship. It was attacked by Calico Jack Rackham's crew, and when she was taken aboard, she was once again dressed as a man. But Anne noticed something, a softness beneath the swagger, a pause in her speech, a silence between words. Anne cornered Mary one night, confronting her with a blade, and Mary revealed her truth to women, hiding in plain sight. They laughed, and from that moment forward, they were sisters of the storm. Anne and Mary became infamous. They raided ships together, fought shoulder to shoulder, loaded cannons in the heat of battle, with sleeves rolled and teeth clenched. They were known to fight more fiercely than the men, especially when cornered. Eyewitnesses claimed they would not retreat, would not surrender, would not show fear. But storms do not last forever. In October 1720, their ship was attacked by a British privateer. Most of the male crew, including Calico Jack, were drunk below deck. Only Anne and Mary stood to fight. They battled hard, cut through ropes, fired pistols, screamed curses into the wind, but they were outnumbered. They were captured at trial. Calico Jack was sentenced to hang. Anne's words to him were cold. If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog. She and Mary were sentenced to, but both revealed they were pregnant. execution was delayed. And here, history fades again. Mary died in prison, likely of fever. Anne's fate is a mystery. Some say her wealthy father paid a ransom for her release. Others claim she escaped, that she remarried, lived quietly, had children, but her name, her flame, never went out. Tonight, as your limbs grow heavy and your breath flows soft, imagine them, two women in the warm dark of the Caribbean, sitting on the deck of a stolen sloop, laughing quietly under a sky bursting with stars. Not villains, not heroes, not just fierce souls who carved space into a world that said, no. Who dressed like men, not to deceive, but to survive, to be seen, to sail, to belong. Asterisk, there is a kind of quiet that only lives on more emotions. It is not silence, but the stillness of windless sails, the soft lap of water against bamboo hulls, and the creak of wood expanding in the sun. In the early 1800s, the South China Sea was not ruled by nations. It was ruled by the Red Flag Fleet. And at the helm was a woman whose name was spoken with caution, respect, and, by some, with reverence. She was called many things: Qing Shi, Zhang Yi, Cao, the widow of Chiang Ai, but history now calls her Chiang Ai Cao, the pirate queen of the South China Sea. Her early life is murky. Born in 1775, likely in Guangdong province, she was raised during a time of upheaval, where the Qing dynasty struggled to control its coastline against foreign traders, opium merchants, and pirates. Some say she was a prostitute working in a floating brothel in Canton. Others say she was already involved in smuggling when she met her future husband, a powerful pirate commander named Chang. Either way, what happened next was no accident. They married in 1801, but not for love. She negotiated equal power in the Pirate Confederation. She did not want to be a wife. She wanted to rule. Chang Ai died 6 years later in a sudden storm. Most expected his empire to shatter. Instead, Chiang Ai-so stepped forward, not with cannon fire, not with war cries, but with order. She gathered her late husband's captains. She negotiated alliances. She adopted her stepson, Chung Po-sai, as both heir and consort, strengthening her claim. And then she did something few pirates ever did. She wrote a code. The pirate code of Chiang Ai-sao was brutal, precise, and unwavering. The loot had to be registered with the fleet. Anyone caught stealing from the common fund was executed. Rape of female captives, punishable by death. Desertion during battle, death. Disobedience of orders, death. But she was not only cruel, she also offered structure. Women captives were often released unharmed, or married to pirates who treated them with respect. She outlawed raiding poor fishing villages, protecting the local economy, and she offered rewards for loyalty, promotions based on merit, and protection for families of fallen pirates. Her fleet became an army, over 70,000 men, more than 1,800 ships, larger than the combined navies of many nations. She did not just rule the sea. She ruled the trade routes, the salt trade, the pearl divers, the local river systems leading deep into China's heartland. At the height of her power, anyone wishing to sail through her waters had to pay tribute. Even the Qing dynasty, the imperial throne itself, could not stop her. They tried, many times. Between 1808 and 1810, the Chinese Navy launched multiple attacks. All failed. They lost ships, lost men. Eventually, they begged foreign help. The Portuguese Navy, even the British Royal Navy. Still, Chiang Ai-so held firm. Her ships used guerrilla tactics. They struck from fog banks, disappeared into the archipelagos, and reappeared miles away. She was always 3 moves ahead, until she decided it was enough. In 1810, at the peak of her power, she walked into negotiations with the imperial court. Unarmed. Unapologetic. And asked for amnesty. She wanted to retire on her terms, and remarkably, they granted it. She kept her wealth. Her adopted son became a Qing official. Many of her former pirates were absorbed into the Navy. She walked away without a scratch and opened a gambling house that prospered for years. She died in 1844, in her 60s, wealthy, respected, and undefeated. No woman, no man, even has ever commanded a pirate empire of that scale before or since. And she did it with strategy, law, and cold composure. Tonight, as your mind softens and your body sinks gently into the night, imagine her standing on the deck of her flagship, the ocean calm and endless around her, her robe fluttering like a banner in the breeze. No shouting, no violence. Just order. Control. And peace, bought through power. She ruled an empire of sails and smoke, and walked away when it suited her. That is power. And perhaps that is freedom. The harbor was quiet that morning. A low mist curled around the hulls of waiting ships, softening the creak of ropes and the hushed chatter of sailors loading barrels. The lanterns still glowed on porches, back in the village, and the first bell of the day had not yet rung from the chapel tower. In that stillness, a girl stood at the edge of the pier, dressed in a man's coat. Her name was Fanny Campbell, and she had just made a decision that would change her life and ripple through time as one of the most romantic, unlikely pirate tales in American folklore. Fanny's story begins in the 1840s, in the quiet town of Lynn, Massachusetts. She was the daughter of a shipbuilder, bright-eyed, independent, and always fascinated with the sea. As a child, she listened to sailors' tales like lullabies, adventures in Jamaica, storms near Barbados, and pirates who disappeared into the fog with ships full of gold. But she never imagined those stories would soon become her life. By the time she was 20, Fanny had fallen in love. His name was William Lovell, a young sailor from a neighboring town. They shared long walks by the tide, rode together under oil lamps, and whispered promises of a future home by the sea. But just before they were to be married, William left on a merchant voyage to the West Indies. Weeks passed, then months. Then a letter arrived, not from him, but from a fellow crewman. William had been captured by pirates near Cuba, his ship taken, his crew scattered, and he was now imprisoned on an island far from rescue. Most would have wept, prayed, waited. Fanny did none of those things. She cut her hair short, bound her chest, took the name Frank Thompson, and signed aboard a brig heading for the Caribbean as a cabin boy. She carried nothing but a small pistol, a sailor's knife, and a picture of William tucked inside a locket. She would find him, and she would bring him home. The voyage was rough. She scrubbed decks, climbed rigging, learned to read the winds and tides. The crew laughed at her soft hands, but not for long. By the end of the first month, she could tie knots faster than the bosun. By the second, she had earned her own hammock and the respect of men twice her size. But it was during the third month that the ship was attacked, not by pirates, but by a mutinous crew from a neighboring vessel. And here, fate changed. When the pirates came aboard, Fanny fought with surprising fury. She slashed through rope, fought hand, and held the quarterdeck until the others regrouped. Her bravery caught the eye of the enemy. Captain, a man who had once sailed with Blackbeard's last apprentices. Instead of killing her, he offered her a place on his ship, and she accepted. Not out of loyalty, not out of greed, but because she recognized the flag that flew from his stern. It was the same one spotted in the harbor where William had last been seen. She was one step closer. Now aboard the Revenge, Fanny sailed as part of the crew, still disguised, still searching. She learned the language of pirates, the rhythm of their world. They raided sloops off the Yucatan, traded rum for gunpowder in Tortuga, and chased rumors of Spanish galleons through the blue-green straits. And through it all, Fanny listened, watched, followed, whispers, until finally, in a smoky tavern in Nassau, she heard the name she had longed for. William Lovell, held captive by a cruel sea captain on a hidden island off the coast of Cuba. Fanny acted quickly. She convinced her new crew to set sail for the island. They needed supplies. She said there were prisoners to ransom, she claimed, but inside her heart pounded like a war drum when they arrived. She went ashore in the dark, crept past the guards, found the crude cell where William was chained, and when he looked up, he did not recognize her. She knelt, reached for his hand, and whispered, "It is me." He wept. She broke the lock, and as the sun rose, they stole a lifeboat and rowed silently to the edge of the cove, where the Revenge waited. The crew cheered. When they returned, William was offered a post, and Fanister Frank, to most of them, was promoted. For the next 6 months, they sailed together. Two lovers, hidden in plain sight among the roughest of men. They raided 2 Spanish forts, freed captives, and avoided the British Navy by hours. But eventually, Fanny wanted peace. She and William disappeared from the Revenge. One night, took a small cutter, and sailed north back to Massachusetts. Back to home. They married quietly, opened a small school. And Fanny, in time, wrote her story, published in 1845. Fanny Campbell, the female pirate captain, became a bestseller. Many believed it was fiction, but she never denied it. She just smiled and said only, "The sea taught me everything I needed to know about freedom." Tonight, as your breathing slows and your eyes grow soft, imagine her, a girl in a long coat, hair tucked beneath a cap, rowing through moonlight to the man she loved. Not a pirate out of greed, not a warrior for glory, just a heart brave enough to follow love across the sea. ChatGPT said, "Lovely. Let us now return to the American coast, to cold waves crashing against jagged rocks, to candlelit cottages by the shore, and to the gray fog of New England mornings, where secrets hide in the mist." Our next story begins, not with treasure, not with warships, but with a simple fishing village, and ends beneath the gallows of Boston. This is the tale of Rachel Wall, a preacher's daughter turned pirate, and the last woman hanged for piracy in American history. Boring history for sleep, what happened to female pirates after capture, and more. Part 14, Rachel Wall, the last American pirate, hanged in Boston, approximately 2,500 plus words, ASMR style. Bedtime storytelling. There is a hush to early mornings in Boston, a hush that settles between the cobblestones and old church bells, where the Atlantic breeze carries salt and memory in equal measure. In the late 1700s, before the rise of factories and iron trains, Boston was a city of tall ships, of candle merchants, and horse-drawn carts clattering over damp brick streets. And on one of these streets, in a modest home near the wharves, a young girl named Rachel Schmidt was born. She was raised in a devout Presbyterian family, taught to fear sin and serve humbly. But Rachel was never quiet, and the sea called to her. She met George Wall as a teenager, a charismatic drifter, a sailor with dark eyes, and the promise of adventure in his laugh. Rachel's parents disapproved, but she married him anyway. They moved to the harbor town of Marblehead, Massachusetts, where George worked on ships and Rachel did laundry and mending for sailors to rough to sew their own shirts. It might have stayed that way. A life of poverty, work, maybe children, but George had a different idea. In 1781, he gathered a few like-minded outlaws and proposed a plan. They would fake shipwrecks along the New England coast. Rachel, he said, would play the role of a helpless woman, crying out from the rocks as if her ship had just sunk. When good Samaritans arrived to help, they would be robbed, sometimes killed. Rachel agreed. They set their trap near Isles of Shoals, a string of rugged islands off New Hampshire's coast. There, they anchored a sloop close to shore, smashed the sails to look tattered, and waited. Rachel stood on the jagged cliffs in torn skirts, shouting for help, weeping convincingly, and when kind-hearted sailors rowed close, believing they were rescuing a survivor, George and his crew ambushed them. Over the next year, the Walls attacked and plundered at least a dozen ships. They stole money, clothing, and supplies. Witnesses claimed they murdered at least 24 men, and yet, Rachel never left. Some say she was trapped. Others say she grew to love the sea, the adrenaline, the power. In the pirate world, she was still seen as an oddity, a woman at the center of a seafaring crime ring. But she took part in every ambush. She rode through storms. She wielded an axe when needed. And after the raids, she always said grace before meals, as if some part of the preacher's daughter still lived within. Eventually, luck ran dry. A violent storm destroyed their sloop. George drowned. Rachel returned to Boston, widowed and alone. But she did not stop stealing. Now, on land, she walked the streets at night, pulling small blades on passerby, taking purses and watches before slipping into alleys. The city was tense. The war with Britain had ended, but peace had not settled. And Rachel, now infamous, was caught in March of 1789. She stood trial in Boston, accused of robbery, piracy, and murder. She admitted to the thefts, denied the killings, begged the court for mercy. She was 29 years old. Her final words were whispered softly, calmly. "I greatly fear that my sentence is just, and my death will atone in part for the sins of my life." She was hanged shortly after, the last woman executed for piracy in the United States. Rachel Wall was not a romantic figure like Anne Bonny, not a queen like Chiang Kai-shek, not a rescuer like Fanny Campbell. She was raw, complicated, raised in faith, drowned in desperation. And yet her name lingers, not because of glory, but because she reminds us that even history's darkest figures were once children with dreams. Tonight, as your mind drifts toward gentle sleep, picture the cold morning Rachel was led to the scaffold, the harbor fog, the hush of the watching crowd, her hair loose in the wind. She looked out at the sea one last time, not as a pirate, not as a villain, but as a girl who had once believed that love and the tide might carry her somewhere softer. The west coast of Ireland is a place of moods. Some days it broods gray skies and biting winds, with cliffs cloaked in mist so thick it feels like memory itself. Other days, it glows, green hills gleaming after rain, crows circling over stone towers, and seafoam dancing at the edges of old harbors. This was the world of Grain Ni Mhil. Born around 1530 into the noble O'Malley clan. The English, she would become known as Grace O'Malley. To her people, she was simply Grain Mahel, Grain the Bald, not for how she looked, but for what she did as a child. Grace begged to go on sea voyages with her father. When he refused, saying her long hair would get tangled in the ropes, she is said to have cut it all off. A small girl, wild-eyed and bareheaded, climbing aboard a galley as rain fell sideways and gulls screamed overhead. She was not afraid. By the age of 16, she was married to Donnell O'Flaherty, a warlike man from another powerful clan. Together they had 3 children. Together they raided, led ships, but Donnell was killed in a feud, and Grace, still young, took command of his fleet. She returned to her home waters and claimed her inheritance. Clare Island and the surrounding sea routes. Ireland at that time was a land of shifting powers. The native clans ruled much of the land, but English forces were pressing westward, trying to control trade, land, and law. Grace did not bend. She became a pirate chieftain, controlling dozens of ships. She taxed English and Spanish vessels that passed through her waters, demanded tolls, took hostages, and not from greed, but from strategy. She defended her people's independence with blade and sail. She remarried, this time to a man named Richard Burke. It was a political match. They wed for 1 year only, as was custom, but when that year ended, Grace is said to have stood in his castle doorway and declared loudly, "Richard Burke, I dismiss you." And that was that. She kept the castle, kept her name, kept sailing, thought her fleet grew bold. She led raids on Galway, clashed with rival clans, sheltered her outlaws in sea caves. She even bore a son aboard a ship under attack, cutting the cord herself, then ordering her crew to fight off the attackers while still holding the infant in her arms. The legend grew. Even her enemies, especially the English, grew wary of her. They called her a most notable woman pirate. And so, the governor of Connaught, Sir Richard Bingham, made it his mission to break her. He confiscated her lands, imprisoned her brother, killed her oldest son, tried to strip her of her titles. But Grace did not go quietly. In 1593, at the age of nearly 63, she sailed to England to petition Queen Elizabeth I herself. It was unheard of. A wild Irish pirate meeting the Virgin Queen in her own palace. But Grace walked into Greenwich Castle, refused to bow, for she recognized no monarch but God, and spoke in Latin as she laid out her case. She demanded her lands returned, her son freed, and her people left alone. Elizabeth agreed, not because of politics, but because of respect. One queen had recognized another. Grace returned to Ireland. She continued to sail, to rule, to raise her grandchildren. She died in her 70s, at peace on the shores of her beloved sea. But her name remained, not as a pirate, not as a traitor, but as a woman who ruled both land and ocean in a time when women were expected to rule nothing. And tonight, as the winds soften and your breath slows, imagine her, standing on the edge of her castle tower, the waves of Clew Bay below, her hair silver in the moonlight, and her heart still steady with purpose, not angry, not afraid, just unchanging, like the tide. The ocean is a keeper of stories. It carries wrecks on its floor, whispers in its foam, and legends in its tides. Not all of them true, but all of them alive. One such tale begins in 17th century England, under gray skies and the scent of damp coal. The docks are busy with trade. The streets echo with carriage wheels and boot heels. And a girl named Charlotte is said to be born to a modest family in a seaside town. Some say her father was a merchant. Others say a retired sailor. But all the stories agree on one thing. Charlotte was different. She grew restless as a child, stared too long at maps, stole her brother's compass, traced coastlines with her fingers at night by the light of a single candle. By 17, she had fallen in love with a young sailor full of laughter and far-off dreams. But when her father forbade the match, Charlotte disguised herself as a boy, took her lover's name, and enlisted on a ship bound for the West Indies. There, she served beside hardened men, faced storms and salt and searing sun. She was quick with a blade, faster with her wit, and earned the respect of those who never knew her truth. But one stormy night, her identity was discovered. A cruel officer jealous of her skill exposed her, mocked her, and threatened to ruin her. Some versions of the story say he murdered her husband, casting his body to the waves. Others claim he forced her to marry him, keeping her aboard as property, not partner. Either way, Charlotte would not endure. She waited, planned, and one moonless night, she slit the officer's throat and threw him overboard. Then, gathering the loyal crew, she took control of the ship. A mutiny, a coronation. Charlotte de Berry was now the captain. Under her command, the ship turned pirate. They raided Spanish galleons, plundered merchant vessels, and shared their treasure equally. She was said to be both just and fierce, a woman who punished cruelty, but toasted loudly after every victorious raid. Her flag bore a single rose, dripping blood. She wore a long crimson coat, gold-threaded cuffs, and carried 2 pistols and a dagger tied to her thigh. But legend, as always, does not let heroes rest. Eventually, Charlotte's ship was wrecked off the coast of Africa. The crew, marooned, ran out of supplies. End here. The story, Darkens. It is said they resorted to cannibalism, drawing lots to see who would die next, who would be eaten. Charlotte was one of the last survivors when she was finally rescued. She was thin, silent, and had lost her taste for adventure. She sailed once more, but never raised a pirate flag again. She disappeared from history's stage, like mist burned away by morning sun. But here is the twist. None of this may be true. Charlotte de Berry first appeared in print in an 1836 penny dreadful publication, cheap fiction, sold on the streets of London. There are no naval records, no birth certificates, no letters or logs. Only stories. And yet, sailors passed her name down like a prayer. Old women swore their grandmothers had known her, and historians, even today, argue over whether someone like her could have existed, because perhaps Charlotte was not meant to be real. Perhaps she was created to be something more powerful, a symbol, of rebellion, of vengeance, of love to fierce, to surrender. A woman who chose the sea, not because it was safe, but because it was free. And tonight, as your breath deepens and the hush of sleep nears, picture her, Charlotte de Berry, standing at the prow of her ship, one boot on the rail, coat flaring behind her like a sail. Her crew cheers, the stars shimmer overhead, and the sea, always loyal to its legends, cradles her ship like a cradle, rocking into dream. Asterisk, the Breton coast is jagged and gray. Here, the sea carves stories into stone. Waves crash like drums against cliffs, and the wind carries secrets that echo between castle ruins. That it was in this land, in the year 1300, that Jeanne de Beauville was born, a woman of noble blood, destined for marriage, motherhood, and quiet faith. But fate, like the sea, does not always respect the wishes of kings. Jeanne married young, as was custom. Her first husband died. She married, again this time, to Olivier de Clisson, a respected nobleman and knight, with whom she bore several children. Their home stood tall on the Brittany coast, with high stone walls, gardens in the courtyard, and a view of the endless Atlantic from every window. They were loyal to the French crown, wealthy, devout, and seemingly safe, until war came. The 100 Years' War had just begun, a bitter, drawn-out conflict between France and England for control over land, honor, and power. Brittany, caught between two thrones, was a land of shifting loyalties. When political winds turned, Jeanne and Olivier's allegiance to France became dangerous. In 1343, Olivier de Clisson was accused falsely of treason. He was summoned to Paris under peaceful terms, but upon arrival, he was imprisoned, and then executed, beheaded in public, without a fair trial. The news reached Jeanne days later. No trial, no letter, no explanation. Only silence and the soft weeping of children, too young to understand. She did not weep, she did not scream. She sold her estate, took her sons, and disappeared. And what she became was unlike anything France had ever seen. Jeanne sold everything she owned, jewels, tapestries, land, all turned into gold, and used to outfit a fleet, 3 ships, each painted black, with red sails that burned like fire against the sky. She named them the Revenge, the Fury, and the Vengeance. And on board, she placed a hand-picked crew of loyal men, former soldiers, loyal knights, and desperate fishermen who shared her hate. From 1343 to 1356, Jeanne became a pirate queen. She patrolled the English Channel, especially near Normandy, but her targets were precise. French ships. She sought nobles, officials, anyone tied to the execution of her husband. When she captured a vessel, she offered mercy only to the crew. The nobles were executed on deck, with Jeanne watching in silence. She spared no one tied to the king's court. Word of her spread quickly to the French. She became a monster, a demon of the sea. To the English, an ally. Eventually, the English offered her protection. She docked in Harwich, was given land and means, and raised her surviving children, including her son, Olivier, who would one day rise to become Constable of France, forgiving the throne that once betrayed his father. Jeanne, however, never returned to court. She retired quietly, died in 1359, far from the sea. But the sea did not forget. Today, she is remembered not only for her vengeance, but for the clarity of it. She did not plunder gold. She did not seek power. She wanted only justice, and when the law failed her, she found her own. Tonight, as your breath softens and your mind drifts from the day, imagine her, Jeanne de Clisson, standing at the prow of a black ship, red sails flaring in the wind, her hand steady on the rail, her eyes cold as iron, a noblewoman turned pirate, a widow turned warrior, a lioness turned storm. The sea, after all, has always belonged to women who do not ask permission. Asterisk, the Mediterranean Sea does not sleep. Even at night, it hums softly with motion, gentle tides brushing coral reefs, bow sails creaking in the wind, the whisper of languages mingling from the coasts of Spain, Morocco, and the Ottoman Empire. In the early 1500s, this sea was not simply a body of water. It was a living crossroads of empires, religions, trade, and war. And amid it all, in the city of Tetouan, in northern Morocco, a woman ruled. Not beside a king, not behind a curtain. She ruled alone. Her name was Sayeda Ahura, and her title, Ahura, meant the woman who is free. Saida was born around 1485 to a noble Andalusian Muslim family in Granada, just before the city fell to the Spanish crown. When she was only a child, her family fled south across the sea, part of the great wave of Muslim refugees forced from Iberia during the Christian Reconquista. They settled in Morocco, where she was raised on tales of loss and injustice, and where she learned early that freedom must be defended. She was educated far beyond the norm for women of her time. She spoke Arabic, Spanish, and perhaps even Portuguese. She read philosophy, studied diplomacy, and by her teenage years was involved in family decisions about trade and politics. At around age 20, she married the ruler of Tetuan, a powerful port city rebuilt by Andalusian refugees. Together, they governed wisely. But when her husband died in 1515, Saida did not remarry. She took full control of the city, not as a queen dowager, not as regent for a son, but as sovereign in her own right. She was formally recognized by the Sultan of Morocco. Letters and treaties addressed her by title. Ambassadors traveled to her, not through her. She ruled from her coastal palace, overseeing trade, military, and civil law. But beneath her composed leadership, Saida held a deeper mission: vengeance. Vengeance for her homeland, for the expelled Muslims of Spain, and for the continued aggression of Christian ships along the Moroccan coast. So she turned to the sea. Saida forged an alliance with the infamous Ottoman corsair Barbarossa, the Redbeard, who dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Together, they wove a web of naval raids against Spanish and Portuguese fleets. Saida became a pirate queen, commanding corsairs from Tetuan's harbor to harass European vessels, seize Christian cargo, and ransom prisoners of war. But these were not aimless attacks. She targeted Spanish shipping, the same empire that had displaced her family decades earlier. She took what was taken, not for personal gain, but for justice. Her name spread quickly to European sailors. She was a phantom, a mysterious pirate queen whose ships appeared from fog like ghosts. To her people, she was a protector of the Ummah, a guardian of Muslim refugees, and a symbol of resistance. Even her political rivals approached her with caution, in a move almost unheard of. The Sultan of Morocco himself, the most powerful man in the land, proposed marriage, and she agreed. But on one condition: he would come to her. It was the only time in Moroccan history that a sultan married outside the capital, traveling to the Queen's palace as a guest on her terms. Sayida Al-Hura was not simply a consort, she was his equal. Her reign continued for decades. She balanced faith and power, ruled with intellect and precision, wrote correspondence to kings, offered refuge to scholars, and expanded naval strength along the western Mediterranean. Eventually, her political enemies plotted her downfall. She was deposed by her son-in-law in a quiet coup, but not imprisoned, not executed. She faded from power with dignity and died peacefully around the year 1561, though time washed her name from many Western books. In Morocco and parts of the Arab world, Sayida Al-Hura remains a symbol of what a woman could be when given knowledge, sovereignty, and rage that refused to bow. Tonight, as the hush of sleep begins to wrap around you, imagine her a woman in flowing robes, walking alone at dusk along the ramparts of her palace. Below her, corsairs prepare their ships. The sea glitters with oil lamps. The muezzin calls out in the distance, and Saida, silent, still, commands it all, with nothing but her gaze. In the shadow of great empires, beyond the proud stone courthouses and royal palaces, there drifted vessels that few dared speak of. They were called hulks, old ships too broken to sail, anchored in harbors and estuaries, converted into floating prisons. Their masts rotted, their sails were gone, their decks sagged with mildew, and iron grates replaced cannons. These were the final homes of those whom nations could not forget, but refused to remember. And among the chained and condemned, beneath mold-stained beams and flickering lanterns, were women. You see, when male pirates were caught, the outcome was often swift: trial, sentence, execution. But women, they presented a problem. Some were seen as victims, others as anomalies. Some were hidden to protect reputations, others erased from the record out of shame or disbelief. But many, perhaps dozens, were imprisoned aboard these hulks, with no trial, no witness, and no escape. One such ship was the HMS Dunkirk, moored off the coast of Plymouth in the early 1700s. Official logs mention a female detainee captured with a group of Irish privateers. Her name is lost, but guards wrote of her sharp tongue and how she sang sea shanties every night until her voice went hoarse. She died during a winter storm, when waves breached the deck and flooded the lower holds. Her body was never recovered. Another case, this time from Jamaica. 1723. A group of women were seized during a raid on a pirate den near Port Royal. They were believed to be lovers, wives, or accomplices. But one, identified only as Marielle, was said to have fought in the final skirmish with a cutlass. She wore a man's boots, had scars across her palms. Rather than hanging her, the governor ordered her sent to the HMS Grantham, a converted supply ship turned holding cell. She was kept in irons for 18 months. Records show she wrote letters to whom we do not know. And then she vanished. No burial listed, no pardon issued, no mention after. These ships were not designed for survival. Most had no fresh water systems. Food was salted beyond taste. In summer, disease spread faster than wind. In winter, the wood iced over from the inside. There were no doctors, just guards, keys, and time. Some prisoners were used as leverage, held until others surrendered. Some were simply forgotten, abandoned when wars ended or regimes changed. Sometimes, they were mothers. One account from the Thames estuary mentions a woman detained with her 2 children, captured aboard a smuggler's sloop. She pleaded for mercy, offered information, but officials refused. One line in the ledger reads, 2 minors transferred to orphan house. Woman held aboard until further notice. No further notice exists. We know of only a few women who managed to escape. One was Brigitte Dulac, a French-born corsair caught off the coast of Martinique. She was imprisoned aboard the HMS, but staged a fire in the galley that distracted the guards long enough for her to slip through an open hatch. She swam 2 miles through shark-infested waters to a tiny fishing village, where she vanished into legend. Some say she lived another 40 years in disguise. Others claim she returned to piracy under a new name. The truth, like her trail, was swallowed by the sea. The hoax continued well into the 1800s. Even after most piracy had faded, the system of maritime imprisonment endured. Women accused of smuggling, rebellion, piracy, or simply sailing without a man were detained aboard these rusting carcasses of empire. Some became forgotten ghosts, others became whispered warnings. But all of them, every one, lived a life between the tides, outside the records, and beneath the gaze of a world that did not know what to do with them. Tonight, as your thoughts soften and settle like dusk on the sea, imagine one of those hulks silent still, moored in moonlight. The water laps gently at its sides. Inside, a small oil lamp glows faintly in the corner of the hold. A woman hums a sea song from memory, her eyes closed, her voice steady despite the chill. She is not a monster, not a villain, just a person whose story was never told, until now. Asterisk, there is a hush inside museums. Even the air feels padded, as if the weight of memory softens every footstep. In one corner, a faded map. In another, the skeletal remains of a wooden hull. Farther still, a case of rusted weapons, swords dulled by centuries, pistols that once sparked flames, and trinkets too strange to name. And if you look closely, you may find something else. A scarf, a journal, a small silver ring, labeled, believed to have belonged to Anne Bonny. Because long after their ship sank, the women of piracy remained afloat in our imagination. It took centuries for their stories to be told. For a long time, historians dismissed female pirates as fantasy, or worse, erased them entirely. They were labeled as camp followers, wives, or exceptions. But whispers do not die easily. Sailors passed stories from port to port. Old women told their daughters. Songs were sung in candlelit taverns about the red-haired woman who swung a sword, or the black-cloaked widow who ruled the Caribbean coast. These tales kept their spirits alive until the world was ready to look again. In the 20th century, as women began to claim their place in academic circles, new eyes turned toward old records. Archivists in Britain unearthed the transcripts of Anne Bonny and Mary Read's trials. Librarians in France uncovered logs detailing the raids of Jean de Clisson. Letters between queens mentioned Saida Alhora. Suddenly, the blurry portraits sharpened. The pirate queens were not just stories. They were history. Books followed, then documentaries, then museum exhibits. In 2017, the Maritime Museum of Cornwall opened an entire wing dedicated to women and the sea. Among the displays, a replica of a female pirate's uniform, complete with hidden dagger and salt-stained boots. In 2020, the National Museum of American History hosted an exhibit on piracy in the Atlantic, featuring a section titled, "She Sailed to," and in online spaces, communities began to celebrate these women. Fan art, historical fiction, podcasts, short films. But it is not just about fame. It is about context. When we remember Anne Bonny's rage, or Grace O'Malley's diplomacy, or Saida Alhora's strategy, we are not romanticizing violence. We are recognizing that history was never only written by kings and generals. It was shaped by those who were told they did not belong and carved a place anyway. The legacy of women pirates lives on not in treasure maps, but in questions. Who gets remembered? Who gets erased? And who had to become a storm just to be seen? These women were not perfect. They made hard choices, sometimes cruel ones. But they remind us that bravery comes in many forms, and sometimes wears red sails instead of crowns. Tonight, as sleep drifts gently toward you, imagine a quiet museum at night. Glass cases glimmer faintly in the moonlight as a custodian turns out the lights. But in the silence, you might still hear it. The soft creak of a phantom ship, the distant echo of laughter, the brush of salt wind through wooden beams, and somewhere, behind glass and velvet rope, a silver ring catches the light, unlabeled now, but still shining.